Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Cultural Contexts of Birth and Motherhood. I am SAR's membership coordinator. My name is Brittany Goodrich. Today we will examine the cultural and biological dimensions of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood through an interdisciplinary lens that incorporates anthropological research and Indigenous knowledge. The discussion will be followed by a reception in the hallway, and here in the boardroom you can flow through freely. Wenda and Zane will stay behind for the reception, and then Gailene and Alex will be leading two groups separately for a half hour each to the IARC for like a focus tour, including objects that are related to this topic. Let's see, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce our panelists. This is Wenda Trevathan, is that right? Trevathan. She's our moderator, and she's a senior scholar here at SAR, and she used to be a scholar in residence. She has her PhD in biological anthropology, is a trained midwife, and has been writing about pregnancy, childbirth, and early infancy for over 40 years, including a book that she's working on now about the 6 months surrounding birth. Is that correct? Okay.
I wrote it, so.
Well, who knows in translation. And then we have Alexandria Hawley. She is a former SAR ANRE intern and one of the current collections move assistants at the IARC. She is Dene, do I say that correctly? Okay. And has a BA in anthropology and Native American studies from Dartmouth College. Her undergrad capstone research centered on Dene women's authority in their childbearing process. She then received her MA in museums and cultural heritages from museums, is that right?
Museums and cultural
Okay, not museum studies, okay. I was like, did I from the University of Auckland in New Zealand in 2024 as a Fulbright grant awardee. And then we have Gailene Morgan, who's the current education outreach assistant at the IARC and a proud member of the Pueblo of Tesuque and Meskwaki Nation in Iowa. She has a BA in Museum Studies from IAI and is currently a grad student there studying Cultural Center and Tribal Museum Administration. Her undergrad thesis focused on reclaiming Pueblo birth knowledge, practices, and histories to preserve Tewa culture and values. And then finally, we have Zaneta, or Zane Thayer, our current Weatherhead Fellow. Some of you may have heard her colloquium yesterday. She's an associate professor of biological anthropology at Dartmouth College, whose research program investigates how early life environments shape patterns of human biology and health in 4 different countries. She's currently writing a book about how evolution and culture shape the experience of pregnancy and birth. Her research and writing are the inspiration for this panel event. So for the event, Wenda will kick off the conversation with a question. Then we'll take questions from the audience throughout the event, so just raise your hand. But there'll be 2 of us with mics, me and Kat, who's in the back. So just raise your hand, wait for us to bring the mic to you, so we can, because this event's being recorded, so in order to be heard, you need a mic on the recording. So. And then we're gonna wrap up this portion at about 3:50, 3:55, and then we'll divide the group into 2, and half will go to the IRC and half will stay behind for the reception. If you have a time limit and you wanna be in the first group, just make sure, we're gonna kind of meet as a group out on the patio. So just head out there if you really need to leave earlier. Yeah, and the reception, there'll be like a small bar with some wine and beer and non-alcoholic beverages as well, and then a couple of appetizer platters. So I think that's everything, and you can go ahead.
Thank you, Brittany.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We all hope this is a conversation and not a lecture or anything like that. But I'm going to start with a very formal reading of the SAR mission statement. To advance understanding of humanity through a unique alchemy of creative practice and scholarly research in Native American arts, anthropology, and related disciplines. A lot of times when people think about the humanities, they look at something like this topic and Zane's topic yesterday and say, what does a biomedical event like like birth, have to do with the humanities? Well, we're going to convince you, if you're not already convinced, and I bet you are, that it is at the heart of the humanities, because birth is what it gets it all started, and where humans come from, and the creation of the family unit and the kinship unit and the community that occurs with the birth of a baby is what it means to be human. And that's actually the title of the book that I'm working on, which is Babies Made Us Human. And so a lot of characteristics that we have in our interaction with babies and that the babies offer to us is what is at the core of humanity. So if anybody has any doubt that this has something to do with what we do here at SAR, then I would say it's the bottom of it all. So anyway, we could spend a lot of time talking about the biology and the clinical perspective of childbirth, but that is not what we do as anthropologists and as creative arts people represented here. So I'm going to start off by asking Zane, and you can certainly, everybody can chime in with that. What do we mean when we say that birth is a biocultural event?
Yes, thanks for kicking us off with that great intro. So there's a lot of different ways that anthropologists define biocultural perspectives. When I think about biocultural perspectives in relation to birth, I think about the fact that birth is a biological event, right? It's an event, an experience. It's been shaped by evolution, like we talked about yesterday. But it's a biological event that's fundamentally influenced by the culture in which it's experienced, right? And so you can't separate the biology from the culture, because the culture in which it takes place is going to impact the whole biological progression of it. And so having this biocultural perspective means that we can view and understand this process only in the time and place where it's occurring.
Thank you. Do you, too, based on your experiences with birth, have something to add about your understanding of how culture impacts birth? Gailene, you can start.
Yeah, so birth obviously is at the center of everything. We all come from our mother. So when we bring culture into it, we obviously bring that sacredness and that spirituality that birth entails. And so that's kind of where my thesis was headed, in that direction of just finding ways that we can empower women in their spirituality and culture through birth. And that's kind of what I was looking into in my research.
I think, I think culture, when I think about birth and culture, I think culture is how we are tangibly caring for those who are giving birth, right? It is the human approach is a cultural approach, right? We're approaching it from our specific lenses. And so to me, it is, to care is to enact a culture, I suppose. And so, yeah. Does that answer what
Sure.
we're asking?
It could go on forever,
Exactly.
obviously. But I will, I hope it's okay to share this information, that both Zane and Gailene have actually given birth. That so far Alex hasn't, and I don't think I'm going to anytime soon. But I would like to have you, especially I'll start with Gailene, I think, how does your cultural identity shape your experience with birth?
Yeah, so for me, I went into birth really not knowing what to expect at all. I was really young. I was only 20 years old and still going to college and figuring my life out. And it was also during COVID. And so at that time, I really felt like a distance between like relationships within my community, because obviously we couldn't gather or be around each other at that time. And so culture, it didn't really play a part until I went to Changing Women Initiative. That was a clinic here in Santa Fe. I believe it's moved now into Albuquerque, but it's for Native women, prenatal care, pregnancy care, birth care. And so through that, I was able to reconnect to my culture, and especially when I also gained my doula. Her name is Gaby. Tewa Women United supplied me with a doula, so thanks to her, I was able to finally delve into my culture and really gain that sense of spirituality that I'm talking about, because before I like I said, I was really distant with everyone, and having those connections with the doula and Nicole Gonzalez, the director of Changing Women Initiative, yeah, they definitely helped steer me into the direction of culture and finding my spirituality and birth through that.
Thank you. Zane?
Yeah, so my education, I think, around pregnancy and birth was interesting because it started out really academic. So I was 24 when I started my dissertation research in New Zealand, and I was interested in studying intergenerational effects of maternal stress, which meant that I was going into all these pregnant women's homes and asking them all about their lives, and so then they were telling me all about pregnancy. And so I was learning about it through this weird lens of somebody who was in my mid-20s and not thinking anything about wanting to reproduce anytime soon. But I was also in New Zealand, as I mentioned. And in New Zealand, midwives are the lead maternity carers for over 90% of pregnancies. And so that became kind of the normalized model to me. Fast forward, 8 years later, and I'm in the US, and I'm pregnant, and I start navigating the US maternity care system. And so I gravitate towards midwives, right? Because that's what I thought was normal. And I realized that as an anthropologist, I've learned about the body, and I think about birth as a physiologic process, right? And that ended up being in line with kind of the midwifery model of viewing childbirth as well. And so I think for me, that was kind of the interesting cultural moment, was learning about pregnancy and birth in such a different cultural context where the maternity care system was so different. And that impacted then the care that I ended up seeking back in the US.
Alex, do you want to think about that?
I'm thinking. I was thinking all kinds of things, and now it's a little. What can I say? Changing Women Initiative is a phenomenal 501c3. If you didn't know, Zaneta Thayer was my undergraduate advisor at Dartmouth. So this is it was a great reunion. And I took Zane's class at the same time that my sister was pregnant. I hope it's okay I'm sharing this. She got pregnant right when I left for my freshman year of college. And I didn't expect to get into a school that was in New Hampshire. I lived in Utah. And my parents, the story goes, I wasn't there. My sister picked my parents up from the airport. And we all live busy lives. But it was a really late flight. They got in late, and Jessie, my sister, when she's dropping them off, is like, I don't know when we're all gonna be together again, so I just wanna let you know. I'm pregnant. And it was a beautiful thing. It was a welcome thing. But it was unexpected, and my parents came off this long journey. And I was upset because I was like, when I leave, you're gonna have this baby while I'm away? And so I was not a fan of children, really, until I became an auntie. It just was never something that came. I just felt like, you want me to be responsible for this? I can't take care of myself. Never, was comfortable sort of caring for children until my sister had her niece. And then, or my niece, my baby. And then suddenly it was different. Suddenly you're changing a diaper with one hand, and you're comfortable with things you were never comfortable with before. So my sister's pregnancy is what initiated this. And then I was so lucky that Zaneta Thayer joined Dartmouth right there at sort of the peak of my thinking, I don't know, or I hope not the peak, but sort of as I was progressing in my thinking. But anyway, I interviewed Nicole when she was based here in Santa Fe, I want to say, and that was a part of my undergraduate writing. And it was I had interviewed her this was the first Indigenous birthing center opened in the United States. And so I had so many questions about the logistics, how do you sort of organize an organization with these Indigenous centered, goals, morals, values. And so it was really special to hear Nicole talk about it. And actually it was fun to hear Gailene connect to that, because I was at the forefront where Nicole is just barely starting this operation, and she was telling me about her vision to grow food locally in New Mexico and to give food baskets to mothers or to women or people expecting children. And Gailene was a recipient of a food basket how many years later? So it is just this very local sort of context of care. And I think the other key thing was transportation is such a barrier in Indian country, in healthcare, in rural communities. And so another key thing about Changing Women Initiative was they would go to the home. It was a home visit program. And that really stuck out to me too as a big benefit, and it makes me a little emotional.
Well, it's exciting to hear about both Changing Women Initiative and Taiwan Women United and the contributions they've made. Does anybody want to add some more about that? Because they're both very powerful organizations nowadays. You want to add something about, especially TWU maybe? About what they're doing with regard to birth?
Yeah, so those organizations are for Native people, and obviously I'm Native, so I was able to get some of their resources that they offer. And like I said, that was a very pivotal moment for me in my pregnancy, was when I was connected with these organizations. And so I was able to feel firsthand exactly how they treat and care for their patients. And yeah, and that's how my culture was integrated in my pregnancy and birth, and so I obviously really hold them dear to my heart, and yeah, I'm very grateful that they can offer these services to mothers and families.
I'll add an observation as an outsider. For most of human history, women who were pregnant and getting ready to have babies got their information from their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunties. And there's been such a disjoint between our history, our heritage, and I think for all of us, regardless of our background, that our mothers and grannies and aunties don't have the kind of information that's useful to us now, or the information that we're seeking. And it seems to me that those two organizations, and others, there are plenty of others as well, plus plenty of other people that are doing this, that are filling in a way for our aunties and our grannies and so on. So I'm very happy to see that they both exist. In fact, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say, it pivots a little bit, but just thinking about the importance of that transfer of knowledge. And some of the research I've done has been around childbirth fear and anxiety. And it's something that's really prevalent. So in 2020, mind you, during the pandemic, we did survey about 2,000 pregnant people across the US, and we found that 62% of people had what would be considered clinically severe childbirth fear. Right, and so obviously some of that is influenced by the timing of the pandemic and associated uncertainty, but a lot of the fears people had were just around uncertainty of pregnancy and birth generally. And you find that a lot of that uncertainty comes from a lack of knowledge, right? And when I think about the history of birth in the US, I think a lot about the history of twilight birth, right? And how there's this whole generation of people who were, put under in terms of twilight sleep. You're actually awake, but you have amnesia. You don't remember because of the drugs. And so I just think about how that is like a really clear time where you have this disruption of transfer of knowledge, right? Because you have all these people whose parents can't tell them about what their birth was because, they can't remember.
And I was struck by, I think maybe both of your theses addressed the idea of the boarding schools, where a lot of people were taken away from their families. That it's your grandmother's generation, I guess, right? So my group, taken away to boarding schools and lost that thread of knowledge. And so it's disrupted not only by sort of the medicalization of childbirth, but also by the loss of almost a whole generation of knowledge, and that generation with the twilight sleep as well. So the whole idea of the community and the heritage and the traditions and so on are so important, and they're missing for so many people, I think. In fact, I think one of the things that you run across a lot, and I think all of you have talked about it, and we certainly read about it, is the transformative power of birth, how lives are transformed at birth. And obviously, a new being has come into the world, so you've got a huge transformation of that from fetus to the newborn infant. But at the moment of that birth, you suddenly have mama, dad, grandmother. These are identities that did not exist until that baby was born. You have cousins, you have this huge network of kin, and that's you or the auntie in that case with yours. So this complete transformative event that goes throughout all of the community, and it's a huge, huge ripple effect, if you will. And I think one of the things that's important to know about the way childbirth and raising babies has occurred throughout history, for human history, is that it's a community effort. I mean, we all know this idea of it takes a village to raise a child. That's been something that's been part of our heritage. I would argue, I can't go back in time to find that out, but I would argue it's been there for hundreds of thousands of years. And I know that the whole idea of that kinship network is one of the keys to our survival. And maybe, Zane, you could add a little bit about what that is from a theoretical standpoint, and then we'll hear some personal experiences probably for how that transformative event affects so many people.
Yes, there's a lot of biological anthropologists who have talked about the importance of allo care from others, and helping us support our kids. And this is because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, as anyone who's interacted with small children knows, they're quite helpless, especially infants. You know, most other primate babies come out and they're able to grasp or hang on to their mothers. Ours can't even hold their floppy little heads up for months, right? So we have these incredibly dependent offspring, and yet a real paradox of human evolution is the fact that we have offspring closer together than other apes, meaning that the time between births is shorter than you see in an orangutan or a gorilla, for example. And so how could you possibly have more helpless infants more often? That doesn't make any sense. And the answer, we think, is that you're getting help from others. And building on work that Wenda's done really about the importance of support through pregnancy and childbirth as well, which I mentioned a little bit yesterday. One of the other studies we did was looking at, during the pandemic, as many of you are aware, people were not able to access the support that they may have wanted because a lot of hospitals had restrictions about the number of support people you could have, or because you couldn't have family, your partner had to stay home to watch your older children, right? So you had to be alone. And so we asked about stress, perceived childbirth stress for people who weren't able to have all the support people they wanted. And unsurprisingly, people who didn't have who they wanted reported a lot more stress in childbirth, independent of cesarean section or other interventions, right? And we also heard a lot about people, if you were only allowed to have one support person, they were really torn because they felt like they had to invite their partner, but they really wanted their mom. Right? And it's just really tragic to hear and think about. So just getting to the point of the importance of support across this reproductive experience.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, so for me, I was, like you said, I was really fearful of birth, and so that's kind of why I took the route of going to the hospital to give birth, when originally, like before I even got pregnant, I was like, yeah, I will try a home birth. That sounds like something I want to do. And then when I did get pregnant, I was like, I can't do a home birth. And so they did have that option at Changing Women Initiative to do that, but I did choose to do the hospital. And like I said, it was during COVID, so I only had my partner there and my doula, but because I had my doula there, I felt like really calm, and I knew that she would advocate for me because we had initially created a birth plan, and she went over a bunch of things that happened in the hospital and like what could happen like from inductions or like what could happen in emergency scenarios. And so just having gone over all that and her instilling the hopefulness and the strength in me, I was able to give birth to my son unmedicated. And that was like my biggest goal that I had for myself. And I went through with it. I had my 2 support people. I wanted my whole family there, but with those supports, I was able to do it unmedicated.
I have not given birth.
But you can talk about it. I mean, I act like I'm an authority on this, and I don't necessarily.
And I'm very fortunate. In 2021, Changing Women Initiative offered a doula certification course.
Does everybody know what a doula is? Does anybody need that? Okay.
Awesome, awesome. I am there to support, really. And so that was wonderful because it is such a life skill to know how to support someone about to go into labor. And I feel really grateful that that is an act of care that I can offer to friends, to cousins, to families. So just another thing about, and I'm forgetting the name, with, I believe, Melissa Brown, the midwife of an Ojibwe Indigenous Birthing Center. Anyway, what was I thinking? Support, I guess.
Well, I think the thing, what's unusual again about humans is how much we rely on a community to help us raise our babies. And this is really different from chimpanzees. I mean, they will not share their babies. I mean, they cling to those babies for dear life, and probably meaning that. And most other animals in general are very possessive about their babies. It's a mother-specific thing, and that's who takes care of the baby. We are completely different from that because we happily share our babies immediately, and we have this kin network. But we also, a bit unusual for a mammal, is we have what we call fictive kin. We create kin that aren't really biologically related to each other. And we all know that we can fall in love with babies regardless of whether or not we've given birth or whether or not we're kin to that baby at all. There's something about that magnetic little baby that makes us fall in love and makes us engage with that baby, whether we're related to it or not. And having fictive kin, which in the case of none of these people at Changing Women or Taiwan Women United or your midwife friends and so on are your relatives, but they're acting like relatives. They're helping you take care of you during pregnancy and birth and in early infancy as well because of that. So that need is so great that we expand it beyond the kin network. Please ask or add or whatever. This is a conversation that most people will add to rather than ask questions.
Well, it's just interesting as I listen to you talk. I'm sitting here having had kids of my own and watched my grandchildren born and realized that in our culture, I don't believe we had very much of this support. And I'm wondering if there's been a change culturally over the last 50 years or so. Families are spread out. If you have money, you can buy a doula, you can buy a midwife, you can buy all this with your health insurance. But in terms of support circumstances, I think what you all have found in your Indigenous community sounds better than many of the things my daughter and daughter-in-law have gone through, and myself as well. So I wondered if that's just our peculiar experience or something that maybe culturally you've noticed.
I think it's our job, those of us who care about a topic like this and care about people who are pregnant and having babies, to make sure that community is there, that it's available regardless of your your origin or whatever your ethnic identity or anything like that. And I think both Changing Women and Taiwan Women are united, are welcoming of all people, aren't they? That's what I understand, or do you?
I think tribal citizens are a priority.
Okay, of course. I wouldn't object to that, obviously. But I think there are all kinds of ways we could intervene. We take the power ourselves, I guess, so to say.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think that this is a support that's been missing from medicalized U.S. birth care for a long time. It does seem like there is a broader movement to increase doulas, for example. So I think that 10 years ago, a lot fewer people had probably heard of doulas. And just since 2020, or maybe a few years before, there's been Medicaid expansion to actually cover doula care in several states. And that's a result of advocacy, right? Like, people are trying to fight so that people on Medicaid can access doulas. There are still issues with that because Medicaid will reimburse, $600 or something. So funding's not always great. But then some hospitals sometimes will have volunteer doula programs as well to try and support people. So there are movements, but they all require individuals, right, to advocate and get grants. Because University of New Mexico actually had a volunteer doula program, which they've wound down, but they're going to be starting a new program. And so, it's just individual people trying to make these things happen. And certainly at a national level, there's more that we can do. Again, comparing cross-culturally, like in New Zealand, midwifery care is the standard model of care. You have continuity of care all through pregnancy and postnatal, including home visits. It's just a completely different sort of model, and so it's possible, but that's just not what we have here presently.
I'm sorry, I thought the mic Hello. Yeah, my name is Veronica, and I did my IBC with Taiwa Woman, and IBC is the Indigenous breastfeeding. And I am a doula at this point. I did my Taiwa Woman. I'm in my process to get my certification, but what I'm saying is that there are grants, and Birthing Tree is another organization that works here in the area, Rio Riva and Santa Fe. And yeah, if you can pay for it, there is a sliding scale or free services for families that can afford it. You know, it's a limited support, kind of short and sweet, but then we refer them out because we know the system inside, like home visiting, growing up, or Las Cumbres, where I work. So I don't know, seems like there are lots of like that advocacy for people that changing. I mean, right now, their maternal day is February 6th if someone wants to go or donate or, yeah. So there's lots of movements, but the support is still needed, and also the support systems need to learn how to support. Because we don't need flowers, we don't need more people to come and visit when you don't, no, I want you to prepare some food, to send some money, to do some laundry for me. So we need to also educate our support systems.
And while I'm walking, I'll share that in the 1990s, I had my children, and I was able to have births with midwives, and I had pretty much no money, no health insurance. I don't remember now how it was paid for, but there obviously did exist at that time for people who are non-native ways to have birth with midwives.
I just want to mention Many Mothers as well. I'm a volunteer with Many Mothers. That's partly why I'm here. And we work once the baby's born, but starting with the first month, and volunteers do exactly what you've said. You go into a family for 3 months unless there's other circumstances where you stay longer, and it's your job to become that kinfolk by really understanding the community, the culture that you're involved with. It's one of the hardest and most rewarding things I've ever done, because I'm used to going in and being sort of the boss of something. I used to run an organization, and you are not doing that. You're anticipating needs, you're helping a person identify that it's okay to ask for help. You're learning about family cultures. And I would also mention that it's open to all families, all cultures, all economic levels. The other thing is just my own story. I had my baby in Germany in the 80s. That's how old I am. And in Germany, the major orientation was midwives. But they were way behind in breastfeeding. They did not think breastfeeding was a good idea. And I had to fight to breastfeed my baby because I ended up having a cesarean. It's hard to breastfeed because it hurts. And so I checked myself out of the hospital early in order to do that. One last thing I just want to say about Many Mothers, the stories that we read in an intake form, the biggest story is the birth story that the mothers describe. It is seismic. And I have met women who are very quiet about their emotions. In that story, they're not. And it's in great detail. So I think I just want to reinforce the fact that this is one of the biggest events you will experience. So thank you.
And that reminds me that so much of what you hear as a person who's waiting to give birth is that all that matters is a healthy baby. Nothing else matters. And that's so far from the truth, because there's so much about you and your identity and your family and your emotions that are so important. And that's the thing that often gets left behind, or at least did get left behind. I think we're beginning to get a little bit better about that, but it was left behind.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to something that was coming up for me when you all were speaking about the transformation that happens at birth, not only for the mother, but for the aunt that's present all of a sudden becoming an aunt, and the grandmother that's present all of a sudden becoming a grandmother. And hearing what you said about, you know, what happened, how did we lose support in birth? what's happened in part is that we've stopped going to births, right? Like the average person has stopped attending births. And prior to the 1920s, when birth moved into the hospital, women were attended by friends, neighbors, grandmothers, aunties, and so we actually saw birth as a culture more. And I always think that the world would be a totally different place if we all saw birth, also death. But if we could see not only the unbelievably healing and cathartic experience of seeing a new life take shape, but also to see women and birthing people go through the transformative, like physical, spiritual, and emotional journey of going into labor, and see her be witnessed and supported by other people, this would be a totally different conversation. We might not even be having this conversation in the same way.
It would not even be a subject. Why would we have a conversation about that?
So we have to return to that, and of
Yeah.
course all these amazing organizations are doing their part. But as a midwife here in Santa Fe, my favorite births to attend are the ones where so many people are present. Of course, the birthing person gets to choose that, but to have other children present, to have aunties, to have a grandmother, and to have people immediately come in and meet the baby, again, if that's desired by the parent, it feels really right. It feels very sort of like, oh, we're in touch with what's primal. And so, birth moving into the hospital meant less people are going to actually see birth.
Yeah. And a woman's first birth may be the one when she gives birth.
Yeah.
So many times. I mean, how many of you those who had children, had never seen a birth until you had a baby? I mean, that's going to be a whole bunch of us. There's no question about that. So.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with the birth fear sort of things too,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
I imagine that if more of us saw birth, if it wasn't a more normal part, right? You have bigger families, you've got cousins and aunties and mom having babies and growing up around that and having it be a more normalized thing as opposed to such an exceptional thing. Way less fear, right?
So my story around birth is that I had all my kids at home, my three sons, and my mom, when I was first pregnant with my first child, she said, "Oh, you can't possibly have your kid at home." I said, "Well, I am." And then when I had my second child, she said, "You're going to do it again, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And when I had my third child, I happened to live very near my mom, and I invited her to that third birth. My mom had never seen birth. She had had 4 children, but she'd been asleep for all 4 of those children. And so she came to the birth of my third son, and for the rest of her life, I heard her many, many times thank me. She said, that changed so much for her to finally see birth and see what it was. It was like part of her was healed. And I guess what I feel from that is that the healing that we hope for in seeing birth can heal generations behind our mothers and our grandmothers when they come to births and can experience that. It's very, very healing for them as well.
I'm thinking again about the word transformation. I've just written a memoir that covered the early years, my teens and 25 years of marriage, and I never used that word. But my situation was that I gave birth at 17, and I had been a pregnant bride, so the grandparents were quite disappointed in me. And it was the 50s, the 1950s, when, you were a bad girl. But, I was a good girl, enjoying myself early.
That's right, yes.
I mean, there were a lot of good girls like me, Sex was something that teenagers are interested in. So I kind of remember, I remember my mother said I had to be the one to tell the grandparents. They came for dinner one evening in this little rural town in Illinois, and I remember agonizing over going into the kitchen to tell them that. It was pretty rough I was 16 then. And they were so upset that they packed up their picnic basket and left. And I spent the rest of this evening in my room. However, the birth was long, and of course I don't remember a thing. It was 1958, 59 when my son was born in July, and there was just no interaction between the hospital staff and myself. My mother and my husband were present, but not at the birth, of course. They're in another room. And that the transformation took place when we went home with the baby. And all of the relatives then couldn't wait to support us and love us. And the grandmother in the farm sent eggs and chicken every week, and mother and dad, our 4 parents, paid some rent for us, and we had still to graduate college, or graduate high school. So it was a remarkable time in that sense that I had really I was sort of outside my own child's birth. However, as you just spoke, I was present at my daughter's. I have a son, and then I had 2 daughters. And both of those children it's the same thing in the 60s, with drugs and medication and whatever. But by the time my middle daughter had her daughter, I was invited to the birth out in Cerrillos, a home birth. And I feel just like everybody else that's ever been to a home birth. It's just, this already happened to me, and now it's happening to my daughter and granddaughter, and it's overwhelming. It's just remarkable. And I'm sitting here thinking, we're mostly women, of course. Do men ever ask women about their births?
If they're my students, they have to. So as part of the class I teach, all of the students at the start of the term have to do a birth interview. And so I give them a structured instrument that asks about a lot of the things that we'll cover in the class, right? And so they're able to interview anyone they want. Many people choose to interview their mother. And in retrospect, after having done this assignment for many years, a lot of the students tell me it's like the best assignment they've ever had. I tell them all to record it, audio record it as well. Because I'm like, this doesn't mean much to you now, or it may not mean much to you now, but like someday this will mean even more. And a lot of them learn all these new things about their birth that they never knew. And the thing is, as I've talked to people about my project, a lot of times people say that one time someone told me that it feels like birth is a special club that no one talks to you about until you've gone through it. But I think really it's that because we're so disconnected from birth and pregnancy, people don't know what questions to ask. And actually, if you ask someone who's been pregnant or given birth, people are really open about their experiences, right? People really appreciate, I've learned, when you ask them, tell me about what this was like for you. And so I think giving people those tools of like, hey, here's some questions you can ask is actually really empowering for them, because then they realize that it's not a special club. No one's trying to hide anything. And here's what you can learn.
But people couldn't answer those questions a long time ago.
Yeah, that's true.
20, 30 years ago.
But so that's why it's about the whole pregnancy and birth and postpartum, right? Because it's all part of it. Sure. And I do think it's important for people to, I think when we're talking about pregnancy and birth decisions, right, and interventions that happen, I realize that it can be really polarizing, and sometimes people feel defensive about the situation that they ended up in. And so I also just try to coach my students and myself to be really thoughtful about the fact that everyone's just making the best decisions that they can for themselves at the time with the information they have available, right? And the situation they find themselves in. And no one should ever feel shame, right, for what's happened to them or what their experience was. But at the same time, obviously, we should try and support people to have the best experience they have for the exact reason that you said, Wenda. Like, it's not just about the healthy baby. Like, we should care about the parent and their experience as well, because you need to be doing well to take care of anybody else anyway.
Do you want to add anything, Gailene or Alex?
Yeah, I think just in my thesis, I was talking about the idea of revalorizing home births, because that was one of the aspects that we lost in having medical institutions like IHS be built for us. And so, yeah, just going back to that and revaluing what it means to give birth on the land and with your family around you, and how that connects us to the importance of birth and
to our ancestors.
And to our ancestors. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so specific to be an Indigenous woman and give birth in this country. And I'm saying that as someone who has not done that. But I do think this sort of history of imposed, sort of paternalistic care, if you want to call it that, it's clear that it reached well beyond just Native communities, right? Sort of de-centering women's authority in such a women-centered, maybe not, maybe it's shifting now, but in such a woman-centered process in a lot of ways. I was thinking about the midwife. The midwife was very common prior to the institutionalization of birth, but she was made, right, those early caricatures of the Italian midwife in the Americas, and sort of really just looking down on it as this backwards practice. And I think it impacted a lot of cultures across in that early period. I'm also thinking about, what do I want to say about IHS? Well, I just think I think our lives are so controlled as Native people, and I think you see that in the hospital context. And so I think that is where sort of reasserting these really important ways of being, ways of caring is just that much more critical, because that care was really targeted for a reason, because it was really powerful. And so I'm thinking a lot about that, and just thinking a lot about how wonderful it is to think about a community-focused event around birth, around life, and around, I also am thinking a lot about death doulas too, and that is such a sacred moment in life, and something that we're also afraid of. My community is very taboo about death, but I think it's something to be aware of, because it's something we are all gonna go through. And so these are just sacred life moments where there's, it can be very powerful or very, I guess, in either capacity.
Well, I think all of us have been talking about resurrecting traditions. In your case, it's the ones that you are familiar with from your interviews. Traditions that we can incorporate. And even if we've lost traditions, it doesn't mean we can't kind of create new traditions that help us to engage in our communities or help us engage in the birth process. We don't have to have had something that we inherited from our grannies or anything like that. We can make our own ideas about how to do things, avoiding appropriation, of course, if we can, avoiding cultural appropriation. But still, we can recreate this for those of us who are so far removed from the old ways of giving birth. We can recreate those in a lot of ways, I think, and it's unlimited how creative we could get if we wanted to try to do that. So when you all talk about bringing traditions back into birth, I think that's true for all of us. We don't necessarily have to find some identity out there that did that for us or something like that. The other thing I want to say is about when you think about kinship and the kinship that's created by the helpless infant that Zane was talking about. For those of us who are over 70, a very good reason why we're here is because of those babies. Because until we began to have those helpless babies, having post-reproductive women in particular in your community was irrelevant. I mean, what were they going to contribute? They couldn't have babies or anything like that. So and that's true for most other mammals. Once they stop reproducing, it's pretty much the end of life and the cessation of reproduction happen at about the same time. But because of the needs that helpless infant has, having someone like a granny there to help raise those babies made living a little bit longer beyond your reproductive years, up till about 20 years, 30 years beyond reproductive years, was the key to those babies surviving. So those of us who are over 70 can thank those helpless babies for the fact that we're obviously fairly healthy. We're able to accomplish things, and we're able to care for babies, whether they're our own grandbabies or not. But the whole picture of the way humanity and human social organization exists today could, at one level, be traced back to that helpless infant. And we want to treat that baby as well as we can with its birth and the mother and the community that's part of that. So I just wanted to point out that we don't have to apologize for having a lot of gray hair and be interested in this topic, because we're supposed to be interested in this topic.
So we're getting close to time. If there are any last questions, we have about 5 minutes.
Or comments, please.
Is there any grandmothering that takes place in other primates or mammals?
In a few, there are. Hahnemann langurs in particular, they're Indian monkeys that have a lot of high mortality as a result of male attacking the babies. And it's often the grannies that come in there and keep the babies, because the moms are holding tight and running from the babies. I mean, running from the male because they're trying to take care of the baby. And it's the grannies that are fighting off the male to get him out of there. So there are some, but they're not necessarily doing direct caretaking. They're important components of the social group, but they're not doing much direct caretaking. The classic example that all of us cite is most of you may be familiar with Jane Goodall's work with chimpanzees. And there was that multi-generational family that became the celebrities to the extent that Flo, when she died, her obituary was in the London Times. But she was that community, that family line stayed together, which was a little unusual, but it stayed together. And Jane and presumably the chimps themselves could identify the relatives there, but the grandmothers didn't do anything to help the baby. Their presence probably helped. Just the fact that they were strong older females, dominant older females, probably helped protect the baby, but they didn't do anything. They didn't engage with the babies. But we never say no, or we never say never in anthropology, because there are always some exceptions out there.
About the performance here, or the presentation. I didn't know what to expect exactly. Is this on? It is. That's the name of a movie, you know. Is this thing on? And I'm wondering, is it, particularly for the two of you Native American women, are there details about giving birth that you can't or don't care to share, or would you? I mean, I don't know if it's, what I know a little bit is that New Mexico was very far advanced as far as midwives early in the 20th century. My dissertation covers some of that, and there was a woman, very well-known midwife in Taos, forgotten her name because, you know, once you retire, you don't have to remember those things because you're not teaching anymore. But yeah, until the war era, Second World War, and when hospital births became much more enforced. But at any rate, I guess that's two separate topics. But perhaps you can talk about. One of you haven't had a child yet, but you probably know a little something from your grandmothers. And I don't mean to intrude on privacy, or what is not allowed to speak outside the pueblo.
Yeah, so for me, my birth was really, I'm fine sharing my story with anyone, but I feel like if I were to have that home birth, then I would kind of, keep that mainly to myself, because I feel like having it at home is more of a sacred time than being in the hospital. And so for me, I don't really have a problem sharing that. And then with the birthing traditions, we're open to sharing that as well. Like one technique that can be shared and that should be shared, I think, is the use of the belt. So this is used during birth. It can either be hung from the ceiling, and the woman is in a squatting position holding on to it. And it's also used after birth to wrap around the woman's stomach to reshape and to tuck everything back in. So, so this is a sash belt, and it's woven.
We can culturally appropriate that.
This is a
if we
Navajo
want
one.
to.
Well, we see those wraps postpartum. Right?
I feel like cross-culturally, there's a lot of examples of this sort of rebozo, like, sash, using something to hang and counterbalance, or to wrap the body postpartum is something that's found in a lot of places too.
I'm so glad you brought up the belt because it is my tangible, I like physical sort of connections. And so I will just tell you, it's the winter time, so I'll tell you just a brief story. I'll paraphrase. Changing Woman, my creator, the woman who created the Dene people, as you see before you today, we go through a rite of passage ceremony when a young woman, a young lady, a young patient gets their first menstrual cycle. There is a 4-day ceremony where the patient and the woman molding her become, in essence, changing women. And it's a very significant rite of passage. If you are ever invited to one, I would encourage you to go because it's a unique opportunity. And if a family invites you, you're welcome.
It's called a kinalda.
Kinalda, yep, exactly, thank you. But the purpose of this belt, when Changing Woman became pregnant, she had a very positive sexual experience, I will say. So I do like stories that sort of are sex positive and that remind us that it is a sacred thing. But she became pregnant beneath a waterfall, and the sun came upon her, and it was a beautiful joining, and she became pregnant. With twins, which I also think there's something very exciting about. A lot of our creation stories in many cultures have twins. She became pregnant, entered into her labor experience, and there's a really big rainbow over her head in the sky. And Changing Woman is one of the holy people, right? We don't use deity or God really, but she is a holy person. And she reaches up, and she's about to go into labor. She reaches up and grabs that rainbow and squats. And she has her twins. And so that is what this sash belt is. That is this sort of symbolic nature. If you ever see Dene pictorials, you might notice the rainbow figure across with a black and white sash belt, sort of following that pattern. Same thing, so it carries a lot of symbolism, right? In our creation, in how we mold ourselves, in how we mold our patients that are going through this rite of passage. This belt is present through it all. Through a woman's life, this belt accompanies her and is a tool in a lot of different ways. And so to me, this is to be a woman, is to have a sash belt. So. Yes, so you can get your belt at any time. Great question. Paloma asked if you get your belt at your ceremony, which that's a good question. Traditionally, I will say, I don't know. But young girls can wear these right before the ceremony. And there are certain pieces of adornment that now have become, a young lady can wear at any time, whether or not she's gone through sort of that transition. But the white moccasins that you see, the Dene woman's moccasins that you see with the white legging, that legging is usually attached at her kinalda, traditionally. But now it's very okay and totally normal to see young girls wearing them prior. But so there are these points of adornment that really make these sort of transitions tangible and really special. And they protect the patient physically, spiritually, in all of the ways. So, yeah.
I've got a lot of voice. Go ahead. I've been to a blessing way for Kevin Aspis, who was, an artist here, and he wove all his sister's belts. He wove his sister's dresses. So I learned about belts and stuff through him and his sisters, and that it was such a familial thing, that he was the one that wove. I mean, that brings me to tears, and the honor that he felt to weave those belts for his sisters. And it's Kevin, Catherine, Keely, it's all girls, and Kevin, you know. So he had a lot of belts to do.
And Alex is a weaver, actually, and
I
she's
am.
made some belts. I know she's kind
Ask me
of
about your
modest,
belts.
but
Come to me for your belt needs. Yeah, and it is a kinship practice for sure. So it is a tangible way to thread family, to tie that kinship together.
I think we're at time, so we're going to have to hold that question for the reception. But
I'll just quickly say that I've got a show and tell back there too, which is to bring archaeology, which is one of the SAR's fortes, back into the story, because there's some rock art of a birth scene in a membrace pot with birth scenes, story about them back there at the back. But anyway, sorry, Brittany.
No, it's okay.